Lynika, at 14, your world shifted on its axis, and having just finished reading your book, Beggars Can Be Choosers, your story is one that is extraordinary in so many ways, and no one can tell it as well as you. So can you just share with viewers your story up to the age of 14 and then what happened?
Yeah, Margie, I mean, it's a really unusual story, to say the least. And but yeah, there is such a lot of power in it as well. So well, basically, I mean, before I ended up on the street, which is what happened ultimately, at 14, just a little prelude to that is that we were already moving a lot as a family, and it was a very traumatic, violent family. There were a lot of things going on at home that meant that we were usually up in the middle of the night and moving in a hurry.
One of your parents was...
We basically lived on the run. One of my parents was wanted, and so when it was time to go, it was time to go, and so we would leave everything behind. Not that we had a lot of belongings, because we moved so much, and because we were quite a poor family, again from moving so much, and just the nature of things that were going on around us. Most of what we had came from charity anyway, but still you get attached as a child. No matter what it is that you're given, and it becomes your own, whether it's a doll missing an arm or a truck that doesn't work properly, but you become attached to those things. But we still had to leave them behind in the night, and everyone had to pile in the car, and there were 7 of us all together with my parents. So we would spend sometimes months on the road, just sleeping upright in the car on the side of the road, or wherever. So that was
so you weren't going to school even in those early years?
No, not in those. We were in school when we would finally find a place, but certainly not when we were in the car, which was one of the hardest things for me, because I really did love learning, and I had this sense of a great sense of loss when I wasn't there, and just a kind of an anxious feeling around it too, about missing out and wanting to be in school. So we did miss that on the road, and I remember always thinking over little things in my head and going over spelling bees that we would have had at the last school. But eventually we would find somewhere else. My father would go into real estate after real estate, because we were quite a large family, and again, he wouldn't have work when we first arrived, so that didn't always look good.
He probably didn't have good character references.
No, to say the least, yes. So he would, he would go in and he would bargain. He was very charming, and he would, eventually we would have a home to live in, and often they were very run down as well, because the way he would get one is if there was one that wasn't, needed some fixing up. There was one house in particular that had, they said, we don't have any on our books except this one home that, actually half of it burnt away, and, they're on the inside, and so there's a staircase missing, and there's this and that. They haven't cleaned it properly. He said, it's no problem, we'll clean it, we'll take it for reduced rent. And so they actually let him. So back then, I don't think they would do that now. There'd be all sorts of laws even to protect both real estate and family, but we were allowed to move in there, and of course he wasn't involved in any of that cleaning. It was poor mum and the kids that could help. But
so your mum was, obviously was a tough life for her.
Absolutely, and this is something I like to talk about too in my story, or from stage whenever I speak, because everyone has their stories going on. Mum was actually was also someone I feared greatly as a child. She was, not the most accessible person. She wasn't very affectionate, and because she had so much going on for herself. Unfortunately, I could see that at the time, but also very much so later on. But yes, it was a very tough life. She had, 5 children to deal with, as well as this sort of life that was on the run and making the best. But I also took a lot of courage from watching her and how she coped, and in particular in this house, because I remember her telling me the story. I was only very tiny at the time, but I remember her telling it to me later, that I was about 3, and she went out the back garden, and the house, the grass was black, and she just thought, how am I going to clean this and make this a home? And she said she looked, I was standing there with a little bandana she'd wrapped around my head to help clean, and she looked down and she saw this little yellow flower going through all the charcoal, and she said she got down on her hands and knees and said, if you can make it, so can I. Yeah. And there were moments like that I remembered later on the street and took courage from.
Yeah. So now, wind forward, you've had a pretty tumultuous, upbringing up to the age of 14. Yeah. And then one day when you were 14, you suddenly found your world, just everything changed. Tell me about that day.
Yeah, absolutely. Upside down. completely changed on its axis is a really good term for it, because I was told that my mum was moving again, that they were going to move, but this time they weren't taking me. I had just turned 14, and they said, my mum said to me, "You're old enough to look after yourself, and you'll be on your feet in no time. If you need help, just go to the Salvation Army, something like that. You'll be fine." And I tried to sort of ignore it to as much as I could. I thought, no, it won't happen, or these sorts of things. And so for the next few weeks I still went to school, but then one day I came home and I could see the house was being emptied and things were getting very close to being moved out, but I still just hoped that I'd go with them on the day. But I came home from school one day and the house was completely bare, and my mum was standing on the side of the curb with my little sister, and that was all that was there that left that day. And they basically said goodbye. She gave me $3, she gave me a few oranges, and I put them in my school bag, and I had a few clothes, and she said goodbye, and she hopped in the taxi with my little sister and they drove off, and it just disappeared. I'll never forget that moment down the street when it turned into the corner to the left and disappeared. And that was it. Suddenly it hit me very quickly that it was just me, that school bag, and a very empty street. And I knew that I had to get out of sight. I just knew right away I'm very conspicuous, and I just need to disappear. I need to get out of sight.
And so for 10 months,
yeah,
you lived on your own in the streets, sleeping in trees, or if it was raining, you would sleep in railway carriages.
That's right, underneath them.
Underneath them?
Yes.
Tell me, it's unimaginable, to be 14 and you're completely on your own. And having read your book, you did not want to be found by welfare. You did not want to be put in foster care. So not only were you needing to survive and to eat, and to find somewhere to sleep and to avoid getting hurt, because there was a lot of, let's face it, unsavory characters. But you were also constantly trying to be off the radar of anyone who might have reported you to social welfare. Yes. So, tell me, what did you learn through that experience and how has it shaped you today?
Absolutely, I avoided welfare. I thought, just as you would as a child, your experience is only what you know, and I thought everybody's family will be like this, and I didn't want to be put in a home where I didn't even know the background of that family, so I imagined I would be in a lot more danger, not knowing the dynamics. At least in my home, I had figured out when someone says this or someone shouts, this is how you can escape it a little bit and hide. So I did avoid that, and so in order to survive, I avoided all of that, and I did sleep in trees at night. I slept under railway carriages when it was raining, and also when unfortunate things would still happen on the street, because naturally, being 14 and looking a lot younger too, I really, and being a girl, I didn't avoid injury and I didn't avoid abuse on the street. I did try to as much as I could, but you just simply can't. And so, there were times like that I actually was beaten quite badly on the streets and couldn't climb trees. So I would seek refuge under railway carriages that had been unhinged. And even though you knew they were, it was terrifying as a child to lay there, and I imagine even as an adult, to lay there under a railway carriage and to have rats and mice and all sorts of things around you running over you, and you just feel it's going to collapse on me or something's going to happen. So there's never any peace. Even sleeping in the trees, it's fitful, it's moments on and off, because you could slip, it's cold, the wind, it picks up, especially at 3 a.m. I used to call it freeze a.m. It just used to feel so freezing, and you practically then would just sit there until it was dawn, and you could get down and quickly get down to the beach or somewhere where there was some sun. So I would try mostly to really kind of sleep an hour or two in the days where I could, again, out of sight, maybe in the beach up in the cliff headland or things like that.
Yeah.
But what kept me going really during that time was the biggest blessing that served me all through life, and it still does, and that is the self-dialogue that I developed. That was there earlier in my life too. I know it was because, again, there was so much going on at home that we were, even though we were a large family, I was quite isolated. We all were. Things were going on for all of us. We were just looking out for ourselves, to survive. So I had this sort of conversation that was going on in my mind with this person that I quite liked. I wasn't aware that you did or didn't like them. I just, I would have conversations with myself about, well, what would we do now? That sounded a little funny, I wasn't consciously thinking what would we do. It was singular, but that's, I kept myself out of trouble. I kept myself amused that way. I kept myself busy when we were in the car on the sides of the road by thinking over things and just constantly having this sort of dialogue. when I was on the street, it increased. I had nobody else to speak to. I was avoiding talking to people. So for that, almost a year, I didn't speak to anybody else. Sometimes you couldn't avoid it. Someone might say hello, and to not be more conspicuous, I would say hello quickly back and move along. But that was the length of it. So the only person that I had, my only relative, my only friend was myself. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, the dialogue I had going on was one of hope and one of where I was going. And there was no if in it, it just was. Mm. And because I knew how much I didn't like what was going on or had taken place, I knew without doubt what I did want. And it made it very clear, and that was my focus, and I thought about it every day.
Well, what did you want?
I wanted a home. I believe that was the first thing and foremost. A home that had a door and a lock. That stood out to me a lot.
You wanted a home with a door and a lock.
Yes.
You think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The basic need we have is for food and shelter.
Absolutely.
Just those fundamental needs that most 14-year-olds, well, in Australia, in America, in the developed world, wouldn't think twice about.
Absolutely. It wouldn't be on a list of things to have, really, would it? Or to dream about. And it gave me great joy to do it. So it was a wonderful thing. And I took note that when I just used to notice that when I thought about those things, they gave me so much joy and pleasure. And when I would hear somebody calling a child for dinner, or I'd see a woman with a little girl, or see some sisters together, it really hurt, and I would feel very sad. And I noticed that if I thought about that for a time and started thinking about where was my sister, I wonder what my mum's doing, I would feel weaker. I just noticed I felt less like I could go forward, or go look for a tree to climb that night. And so it was just sort of a math. I realized feeling good and thinking about these things makes me feel stronger and better. And dwelling too long on the things that are hard makes me feel weaker.
There's such a powerful lesson in that, isn't there? That it's so easy for us who are in, far better circumstances than that, but to focus on what we don't have and what should be there. Like, I should have a mum that hasn't left me on the streets. I should have family. I should have a home. But when we focus on things that we don't have and can't control, how much that weakens us, and physically and emotionally and mentally in so many ways. So just knowing intuitively, don't focus on those thoughts, because you wouldn't be able to climb a tree at night.
Absolutely.
A simple, really
black and white,
fundamental.
Really.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I gravitated more to those good thoughts, and I would also, and I think this is a really important thing too, of course, is about the validation. Often, if I had been beaten, for instance, on the street, I would, that was really hard, because not only was it physically hard, but for someone to beat another person, even more so, I think, whether they know you or not, but these were strangers, and it was, it does a lot to your self-esteem. It's hard as it is to be on, to be in general, but on the street too.
Imagine.
And you're trying to keep this, this together, and then someone's beaten you, and you're physically, unable to climb to trees.
And you're small, you're petite. I'm sure at 14 you were more so.
Yes, very tiny.
Yeah.
So it was a struggle, and you'd be laying there, and you would feel like you'd been kicked to the curb, and not even an animal should be treated that way, and it would be hard. But I would console myself. I would also, because I would notice that those were the times that I would really feel down. I would feel very naturally so, very hurt, and a sense of hopelessness would just start to creep in. And then I would say to myself, of course you feel this way. This is awful. This feels really bad. This hurts.
But validating, not making yourself wrong for that.
No.
Just, it did hurt.
Yes.
Being beaten
makes sense.
Up.
That's right. That's what I think, of course. It makes sense, because I would look down even and see my hands were grazed from trying to get away, on the gravel or whatever it was. And I would think, of course it hurts. Of course you don't feel good right now.
Yeah.
I think this was the most important thing, was I was there for myself. I would go from that point to saying, we're going to get somewhere dry. I'm going to go and find somewhere that, where there's some shelter.
If you think about, who we are is, we're always changing and growing. Day by day, we're the same person that's moving through life. Mm-hmm. When you look back to the thread of who Lynika was at 14, living on the streets, and who you are now, do you still feel connected to that girl?
So much so. It's funny, I often look back at that girl for advice, at times, especially when push comes to shove.
And it's tough and resilient and resourceful, and
with very little.
So nothing.
So I think, she knew what to do back then with so much less than I have now. What would she say?
Yeah, usually I say,
Yes.
what would you tell the younger you? You're like, what would the younger me tell me today?
That's exactly right. It's so true. I really feel that, and I feel her really close and personal. She's right there, and it's great. And I still actually just feel that sense every evening, even when I go to bed. Though I'm so grateful for my bed. I'm so aware still of what it is like to be outside and cold at night. What it would be like, even if I take a walk at night and I walk by. There are certain sounds that I'll never forget. Of course, those sounds of dinner plates and forks on plates that I would walk by at night and. Or be in the tree, and you could still sort of hear this sort of kerfuffle of people going home, and that wasn't going to happen for me. And I remember this longing, and again this feeling of this is what I will have. So now, even now, when I walk by at night and I hear those, there's a mix. I feel that pang of those moments of being outside and looking in, and then I feel this great gratitude that I have that, but that also I'm so aware of what that means to someone else, that when I even offer for someone to come to dinner, even if they're not in a circumstance I was in, I just know what a beautiful thing it is for both of us, or all of us,
hospitality.
Yeah.
So how did you eat?
Yeah, wow, that was really difficult. And of course, you have to eat something to survive, even if, there were many days I went without eating. And again, in some ways, a blessing of adversity of my earlier life meant we didn't eat very often at home. Even at school, I used to dread the lunch breaks and the recesses because I would very rarely have any food. And if I did, it might just be the end crust of the bread, wrapped in the bread bag, which is bad enough. You could have a gourmet sandwich in there, and you know what it's like at school. If it's wrapped in a bread bag, it's not
just
look.
socially embarrassing.
Yes,
when you're
right.
a child, you want to fit in and look like everyone else.
Exactly. And things are getting picked on can happen for many reasons, but you just want to avoid whatever there is. But yeah, I very rarely ate, and I didn't want anyone to notice that. So we didn't eat very often as children. So in some ways, as much as that's really such a tragic thing, at the same time on the street, at least I was, a little prepared to go some days without eating. But what I did do was I would go around the back of bakeries or the back of fast food, takeaways, things like that. Actually, it was more takeaways back then. And they would put the food out the back. I'm not sure how it is today, but back then that saved my life. It was extremely humiliating. I felt so much shame, and I felt that for a very long time in my life. This sense of, scavenging really for food. It's a really humiliating experience to have to go and sort of beg for this food. But thank goodness for it.
Have you let go of that shame?
Yes, in fact, yes. And it's wonderful. I love when these sorts of things come up and you realise, my goodness, I'm still carrying something about that. Because I call those fence posts, gee, there's something down on the property that I haven't tended there, and there's an area that I can make stronger. So I have definitely now, I look back and again, it's that girl. I look back and I think, good on you. You kept you and me, the adult me, alive by doing that. No matter how awful it felt, it was survival. And that is what I did. I would go and get and it was mostly bread I survived on for that year. It was very rarely anything else at the back. I didn't want to eat out of bins. I knew I could get sick, and I was aware again, I don't want to go to hospital. I don't want to have to try and see a doctor. I can't afford to be ill. And I don't mean monetary. I mean, I'll get reported to the authorities for sure. There's this young girl that they brought into a hospital with, obviously a street child. So, yeah. Yeah.
So the night before you were 15, you found your way interstate.
Yes.
And found your mum. You got her contact details through your older sister.
Yes.
And you landed, you thought, home again.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't actually work out the way you were hoping.
No, it was a very sad moment. I allowed myself to build some hope that maybe things were different. But as soon as I saw Mum's face and she opened the door, she wasn't happy. She looked very concerned. And I was allowed to stay one night. And then I had to go. And she allowed me to stay because it was my birthday. She realised it was my birthday.
It's your 15.
Yes.
I have a daughter who's 15 next week.
Wow.
So same age. And
brings to mind how young it is.
Yeah, and it makes me realise how much your mother's life was obviously so different to my own, because it's incomprehensible for me to imagine being a mum, having a daughter. Well, firstly leaving her on the street to say you're old enough to fend for yourself, but two, having her rock up after a year, having fended for herself, and saying, just for today because it's your birthday and you're turning 15, I think frankly you need to go off again.
Yeah.
For you, obviously, I mean, there were so many things for you to try and make sense of in that time. But
Yes.
how was that? Having found home again,
Mhm.
Mum, here I am, and then she's like, oh, I still don't want you with me.
Yeah, it was really tough. When I you know, I think back now again, there was just that sort of that folding inward, and fortunately again what was in there ultimately helped me, but it was that sense of, you know, there is nothing out there, it's all inside, it's all up to me. And it was a really sad moment, but I was also extremely grateful to stay a night. It was, you know, staying indoors, like in a real home. It just wasn't a tree. So for one night,
that was your 15th
fantastic.
birthday present.
Yes.
You got to sleep in a house for
In
a
a
night.
house, in a bed.
Happy birthday.
Yes.
Now get out.
That's right. And it was. It really was that. And the next day having to get out again was very frightening because it was a town I didn't know. So I didn't even know the streets and I didn't know any of the dynamics. But there I was again. So,
What happened then?
The first thing, again, I actually lucky, it was near the sea, and so there were trees down that way, and I headed down toward the beach and took some solace, which I did take a lot of strength from nature. I think just being near the ocean, this amazing body of water that moved in and out, sort of like breathing really. It was just a real centering location to be. And I was sleeping again in trees and just doing what I could to survive for another couple of months really, about another, maybe 2 to 3 months. And then it just struck me one day, I just had enough. And I knew I was 15 and I back then I knew that I could get a job and I could support myself and I wouldn't necessarily, be picked up by welfare. If I could get a job, then I could set myself up. And so I just made that decision, enough is enough. And again, I couldn't have done that earlier because I'm less than 15, I couldn't do it. So, but it was just, no, this will no longer do. And I went off to and found this little caravan park. And I do this often. I bless that woman that was in that caravan park. This was up in Queensland. Yeah. At this part, I had gone from Sydney, where I had to survive on the street, and made it interstate up to Queensland, to a little seaside town near Brisbane. Right. And I walked into the caravan park, and I kept myself as tidy as I could on the street again, to be very careful about how I looked,
so that you didn't look homeless.
Yes. Yeah. And so even the amount of clothes I had, I would walk into the ocean and swim in those, and then dry out. And hair, I had a little brush in my bag, and I would try and just always had it in the ponytail, very much like the cover of my book, and I would just have it back because that was the easiest way for it to hopefully not look, too scraggly, too homeless child. But I walked into the caravan park and I just said to her, I need a caravan. And she said, do you have a job? And I said, no, but I will today. And I really believed that, and I just thought that's how it worked and that's what I would do. And I guess I'd had, in a way, good training with my father who did that from town to town. So I walked in, believed that, and she believed me too, but I also, of course, I think she took great compassion. And probably she said to me, okay, I have 2 caravans and I'll give you till the end of the week to pay the rent. And I think in her kindness, she probably thought, well, we'll assess it again then. But she took me around, and there were these 2 caravans, and I chose this little one because I could actually see the back garden of where my mother was living from it. It was quite amazing how it all worked out. It was a fair way.
Did your
down.
mother know that you were looking through into her back garden?
No, she didn't know. She was further down the street. It was just like she was like a little dot hanging out clothes on a line. But it gave me great comfort to be able to see her, to know she was okay. It was really important to me to know that she was all right, she was alive, and that she was going about her day-to-day things. And I did get a job. I went out, and again, bless that man, that I walked into that shop and just said, I need a job. And here's the thing, Margie, because on the street, I was missing school terribly. I really had this sense of wanting to learn, and that I was missing out. And this was a year, really. So I did whatever I could. I was so blessed to have a book with me. I had one book with me, and I read that all the time. I read it constantly, back to front, opened it anywhere, read it. And I also used to keep going by reading bus timetables, because what I did every day on the street was walk, to stay out of danger and to keep my mind busy and to just be, active and not be spotted. I would walk and walk and walk, and I would stop at bus stops and I would read, 7:32 bus to Beaumont or things like this, and then read them all back just to keep my mind active with words and reading. I would pick up little brochures as I walked by the outside of a shop if I could, and I would read it, and then put it down somewhere else. And then these were the things. So I was keeping, as as best I could in
Mentally.
learning. Yes.
Yeah.
So when I walked into the store, you know, again having my book, I was fortunate. I was really good at English and did love that. So you know, at least I came across as quite a literate child, and that probably helped. So he gave me a job, and I started work there. And I do have to add here, with my very first pay at the end of that week after paying rent, I bought a dictionary. I just wanted to learn, and I just devoured that.
And later I saw you bought a thesaurus.
That was the second one. Yes. That's right.
So
joys.
hungry for learning. Can I imagine, you know, our kids with their spare money going, oh, I want to buy a dictionary. I want to buy a thesaurus.
Absolutely.
Yeah.